My son-in-law forced me to sell my house and threw me out. My own daughter hurled a bag of rotten trash straight at my face and shouted, "Take your garbage with you." When I finally opened it, I was completely shocked. Inside was a savings account containing millions of dollars and a note. What was written on that note left me stunned. But before the story begins, please write in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so Stories with Purpose can continue to grow and bring you more meaningful stories. "I don't understand, Henry," I whispered. "What kind of document is this?" That day, my living room was crowded with people. The table that usually held nothing more than tea and biscuits was now covered with folders and legal papers. A neatly dressed man, introduced as a notary public, sat on the couch. Beside him was a young couple, the prospective buyers. I sat at the far end, gripping a pen that felt unbearably heavy in my hand. Henry, my son-in-law, smiled at the notary, then turned to me. "It's just administrative paperwork, Mom. Just a title transfer. Makes taxes and utilities easier. Nothing to worry about." I glanced at my daughter, Rebecca Whitman. She sat beside him, holding a green folder. Her blouse was neat, her face tired, but her voice remained sharp. "Just sign it, Mom. No need to overthink it. Henry and I will handle everything." Since my husband George Whitman passed away, this house had been the only thing that felt certain in my life. This was where we raised Rebecca. This was also where I looked at George's cold face for the last time. "If the house stays under your father's name, that's okay, right?" I asked hesitantly. The notary smiled stiffly. "Legally, ma'am, after Mr. Whitman passed, there is an inheritance process. To keep everything in order, the property certificate needs adjustment. This is for the family's benefit." For the family's benefit. Those words had been used far too often in this house. Henry slid the document closer to me. "Please trust me, Mom. I'm thinking about the future of Lucas, Natalie, and Claire. If we don't take risks, how will we move forward? This house belongs to all of us as a family." When Henry first proposed to Rebecca, George and I were happy. He was polite, well-spoken, but in recent years, I kept hearing him talk about investments, projects, opportunities, words I didn't fully understand, except that they always required money. "If Mom doesn't sign, we can't buy the new house," Rebecca cut in. "Do you want the kids growing up cramped forever?" "Lucas's room is already like a storage closet. Natalie constantly complains. Claire doesn't even have space to play." I remembered how Lucas barely spoke to me lately, always locked in his room. Natalie constantly had earbuds in, annoyed whenever I asked for help. Only Claire still hugged me until her mother pulled her away. "Don't spoil Grandma," Rebecca snapped. "Our life can't stay like this forever." She continued, "This house is old. The walls are damp. Even my coworkers comment on it. Do you know how embarrassing it is when my boss comes over and sees a place like this?" I lowered my gaze to the worn carpet. Beneath it were tiles George had installed himself, slightly crooked. My hands trembled. "If I sign this, I can still live here, right?" I asked, clinging to hope. Henry chuckled softly. "We'll move to a new house, cleaner, nicer. You can come along if you want, but space is limited. That's why we're sorting this out now. Let's just finish the paperwork first." "If you want." Limited space. Those words crushed my chest. "Henry, Rebecca," I lifted my head. "This is my house, your father's house. I'm afraid I'll end up with nowhere to go." "That's exactly why we're planning ahead," Henry snapped. "If we don't sell this place, we won't have the down payment. Do you want us renting forever? What about the grandchildren's future? Rebecca sighed loudly. Seriously, Mom, we both work. We have mortgages, cars, school fees, but you're always suspicious. What do you think we want from you? You don't have anything except this old house. That sentence felt like a slap. I saw Lucas pass by the doorway, glance briefly at the table, then disappear into his room. Natalie sat on the stairs, scrolling on her phone, pretending not to care. No one came to comfort me. The notary pushed the paper closer. Your name goes here, ma'am, just your signature. I gripped the pen tightly. I remembered George whispering on the porch years ago, if I'm gone, protect this house so Rebecca will always have somewhere to come back to. Dad wouldn't want this, I murmured. Rebecca stared at me, annoyed and pleading at the same time. Mom, please don't embarrass us in front of everyone. It's just a signature. All eyes were on me. I took a long breath. Is this really for your good? I asked one last time. Of course, Henry replied quickly. We're family. My hand finally moved. The pen touched the paper. I signed my name, Margaret Collins. That signature, usually scribbled on receipts, felt like I was signing away something far greater. Thank God, Henry murmured, patting Rebecca's shoulder. All done. Rebecca smiled faintly. Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this. I nodded. Inside, something collapsed. From that day on, the house was no longer mine. I nearly fell if I hadn't grabbed the fence. Take your trash with you, she screamed. Don't leave anything here. The yard suddenly went silent. The only sound was my own breathing. My eyes burned, not just from the pain in my face, but from her words. Henry honked the horn briefly. Rebecca, come on, let's not waste time. Rebecca threw another trash bag at my feet. That's enough, Mom. Don't come looking for us when things get hard. You chose your own path. The car sped away, leaving behind dust and the fading sound of the engine. I stood there, holding two large black plastic bags on either side, a cloth bag slung over my shoulder. Homeless. Margaret! A soft voice called out. Mrs. Anderson, my neighbor, approached me with a sorrowful face. Come to my place first, she said gently. We'll figure things out slowly. I nodded, holding back tears. We dragged the bags to her house. On her porch, I sank into a plastic chair, my breath still uneven. Mrs. Anderson poured me a glass of water and urged me to drink. Once I calmed down a little, I opened one of the bags. A damp, musty smell rose immediately. My worn clothes, cleaning rags, George's old, thinning sarong. At the bottom of the bag, among the crumpled papers, I saw something familiar. George's brown folder. The same folder I had seen Henry throw away. My hands trembled as I lifted it. The edges were torn, but it was still closed. Slowly, I opened it. Inside were several old documents, former work letters, receipts, and one object that made me stop breathing. A savings passbook with George Whitman's name clearly printed on the cover. What is this? I whispered. I opened the first page. Rows of numbers lined the final balance column. My eyes widened. There were so many zeros. I counted silently. $5 million. Tucked behind the passbook was a yellowed white envelope. On it was handwriting I knew all too well. George's writing. For Margaret, if I'm no longer here. My chest tightened painfully. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, also in his handwriting. What were you hiding from me all this time, George? I whispered. As I read the first line, the world around me faded away, replaced by my husband's voice, alive again through his words. George's handwriting wasn't neat, but I knew every curve of every letter. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm already gone. I'm sorry for writing like this. I know you never liked dealing with numbers and banks. My eyes immediately filled with tears. I wiped them slowly and continued reading. It's not that I don't trust our daughter. Rebecca is kind, hard-working, and smart. But city life is different. People are easily dazzled. Henry talks well and always has big plans. I was afraid that if all our assets were in their hands, you would be left with nothing. My hands shook. The paper felt unbearably heavy. So, little by little, from overtime pay, severance money, and old savings, I put everything into this account. The account is in my name, but my intention is only one. This is for you. My vision blurred. If one day you are driven out, belittled, or made to feel worthless, you will still have the means to live with dignity. My eyes burned. I repeated the words silently. If one day you are driven out, as if he had seen this day long before it came. Don't tell Rebecca or her husband about this unless you are certain they still remember God and their parents. If they choose the world instead, then you must protect yourself. Forgive me for only being able to protect you from afar like this. I love you, Margaret. Take good care of yourself. At the bottom was George's signature, the same one I had seen on official letters, payslips, every document of his life. How could you think this far ahead, George? I whispered hoarsely. Mrs. Anderson sat across from me, watching anxiously. What is it, Margaret? Slowly, I handed her the passbook and the letter. My hands were still shaking. This is my late husband's savings, I said softly. Look. She took the passbook, adjusted her glasses, and read. Her eyes widened. Oh, my God, she whispered. This is real. I can't believe it either, but that's his name. That's the bank he used to visit. And the balance, you can see it yourself. She counted quietly. $5 million. The number sounded unreal to me. I had spent my entire life handling nothing more than daily household money, now faced with a figure beyond imagination. Tomorrow we go to the bank, Mrs. Anderson said firmly. No overthinking. We ask directly. That night I barely slept, not from happiness, but from turmoil. There was anger, sadness, and guilt. Anger at Rebecca and Henry for throwing this folder into a trash bag. Sadness knowing my husband carried such deep worries without me ever realizing. Guilt for always going along, never checking, never asking. Early the next morning, Mrs. Anderson and I took a city bus to the bank listed in the passbook. The building was tall and cold, its floors gleaming. I felt very small walking inside. At customer service, we waited. A young female officer called my name. Mrs. Margaret Collins? Yes, dear, I answered softly, standing. How may I help you? I handed her the passbook. This is my late husband's savings. His name is George Whitman. I found it among his belongings. I want to know if it still exists. She typed on her computer. Her expression turned serious. Do you have Mr. Whitman's death certificate, your family record, your ID? I took out a small plastic folder. Thankfully, I always kept important documents in my bag, not in the closet. She examined them and typed again. Ma'am, the account is still active, she said quietly. The balance matches the passbook. However, for transfer to the legal heir, there are procedures. court determination, supporting documents. Her words started to sound like buzzing bees. Complicated, long, frightening. "So this is real?" I asked again. "Yes, ma'am, but for now the account will be temporarily frozen until the legal heir determination is complete, for security." "I don't understand, dear," I admitted honestly. "I'm just scared. My daughter and son-in-law just sold my house without explaining anything clearly. They don't know about this account. My husband wrote this was meant for me. What should I do?" The officer looked at me longer. There was sympathy in her eyes. "Ma'am, you may need legal assistance. Our bank works with several attorneys. If you wish, I can connect you." Before I could answer, a male voice spoke from behind. "Excuse me, is this the inheritance case from Mr. Whitman's account?" I turned around. A man in his early 30s stood there, wearing a dress shirt with a slightly loosened tie, holding a folder. He looked friendly, with faint eye bags from long nights. "Yes, Mr. Grant," the officer replied. "This is Mrs. Margaret Collins, the late Mr. Whitman's wife." He extended his hand. "I'm Oliver Grant, ma'am, a partner attorney with Atlantic National Bank. May I sit?" I swallowed hard. "I don't have money to pay an attorney," I said instinctively. He smiled gently. "Don't worry, ma'am. Let's just talk first. The initial consultation is free." He paused, then added honestly, "When I heard your husband's name, I was surprised." "Why?" I asked. "Because when I was a child, my father almost got transferred to a remote area because of a misunderstanding at work. There was a report against him, but someone defended him and explained the truth. A staff member named George Whitman." My chest warmed. "So you knew my husband?" "I never met him personally, but my father never forgot that kindness. He mentioned his name for years." Mrs. Anderson squeezed my hand softly. "See, Margaret, God sent the right person." Oliver carefully read the passbook and George's handwritten letter. His expression grew serious. "This letter is very strong morally," he said. "Legally, we still must follow inheritance procedures, but your husband's intention is clear. This money is meant for you." My days became simple. In the mornings, I bought vegetables at the small corner store. At noon, I cooked modest meals. At night, I sometimes sat on the narrow porch or lay on a thin mattress, staring at the alley outside. Every night, I held George Whitman's passbook and his letter, making sure they were real. "I'm a wealthy woman living like the poorest person in the world," I once said to Mrs. Anderson with a hollow laugh. "Not yet, Margaret," she replied softly. "What matters now is that you're safe. Don't let them catch the scent of this." One afternoon, Mrs. Anderson came over with a hesitant look. "Margaret, earlier today I visited my niece in the new housing development. I ran into Rebecca." My heart immediately pounded. "What did she say?" "She told people all kinds of things," Mrs. Anderson continued carefully. "She said, 'My mother is difficult, dramatic, refuses to move, refuses to sign documents. She makes herself look like the victim.'" I swallowed hard. "She also told people there, 'My husband and I are exhausted taking care of her. We support her, we give her a place to stay, but she's never satisfied.'" People just nodded, pretending to understand. I clenched the hem of my skirt tightly. So now, in everyone's eyes, I was the ungrateful, troublesome old mother. Not long after that, another one of Mrs. Anderson's relatives came to visit. He opened his phone, either carelessly or intentionally, and his social media feed appeared right in front of me. Rebecca Whitman's name filled the screen. Her profile photo showed her standing in front of a new house. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept reading. There was a photo of Rebecca in front of a white, freshly painted townhouse, a beautiful gate. Henry stood beside her with the children. The caption read, "Grateful step by step. What matters is fighting for our children's future, even when the hardest trials come from those closest to us." Below it were dozens of comments. "So proud of you, Rebecca. Being a devoted daughter isn't easy. Stay patient with parents. They're old after all." I felt nauseous. In another photo, Henry sat inside a new car, writing, "For family, every sacrifice feels light. Thank you to my wife who always stands by me even when some people don't understand." The one who didn't understand was clearly me. That night, I couldn't eat. In the darkness, I whispered, "George, look at them using good words to cover their cruelty." A few days later, Oliver Grant arrived carrying a thick folder. He sat on a plastic chair in my rented room, reviewing documents one by one. "This is Rebecca's birth certificate, your marriage certificate with the late Mr. Whitman, his death certificate," he said. "Everything is complete. We'll file for heir determination first. After that, the account can be transferred to your name." "I'm scared," I admitted honestly. "If they find out, they'll get even angrier." "That's exactly why we must do this properly," Oliver replied calmly. "When everything is legally solid, they can't act recklessly. If they do, they'll be the ones in trouble." I nodded, still uneasy. It wasn't that I didn't trust Oliver. I had simply lived too long in a powerless position. One afternoon, I ran into an old neighbor at the grocery stall. "Margaret, I thought you moved in with your daughter at her new house," she said, surprised. I smiled faintly. "No, I'm here." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I heard that it was you who refused to go, that you insisted on the old house and wouldn't compromise with your daughter." I froze. It felt like being stabbed. She hurriedly added, seeing my face change, "I don't believe it, but the rumors are already spreading." I nodded without responding. Back in my rented room, I sat on the edge of the bed as tears fell quietly. They hadn't just taken my home, they took my story. They rewrote it, turning me into the villain of their lives, and people believed them. A few days later, Oliver returned. His face looked strained. "There's some unpleasant news," he said. "What now?" My heart sank. "A friend of mine works in Henry's business circle," Oliver explained. "He says Henry often talks about his difficult mother-in-law in front of colleagues. He claims he can't focus on work because he has to take care of a mother who constantly demands attention." "So he's selling my story?" I whispered. Oliver nodded. "He uses the image of a devoted son-in-law sacrificed by his own mother to justify everything he does. People who don't know the truth easily sympathize." I laughed, but it sounded bitter. "I'm here eating tofu and simple meals, and he's using my life story to make money." Mrs. Anderson, who had been silent, finally spoke. "That's why, Margaret, you need to stop thinking of yourself as just an ordinary old woman. You're someone who can fight back now." "Fight back? With what?" I shook my head. "At my age, living in a tiny rental with no one?" Oliver looked at me seriously. "That's exactly why they feel free to control the narrative. They think you have no voice, but they forgot something." He lifted George's handwritten letter. "These facts can't be changed. This letter, this passbook, these documents showing your husband's intentions. Read this often," he said gently. so you remember your late husband believed you had the right to protect yourself." That night, I sat alone on the floor, the letter resting on my lap. Outside, motorcycles passed by, children laughed and shouted, playing hide and seek in the alley. "Rebecca," I whispered to the stained ceiling, "you sleep in a new house, on a soft bed, under bright lights. You tell people you're the victim, and here I am, made the villain in the story you created." My chest ached, but something else began to surface. Disgust. I was tired of crying, tired of people's gossip, tired of staying silent while being trampled. I remembered Oliver's words. "That's where your strength lies." They didn't know I was holding the key they had thrown away with the trash. They didn't know I had a second chance left to me by my husband from beyond the grave. For the first time since being cast out, I wasn't just sad. I was angry. And for the first time, I began to imagine a day when they would have to sit still and listen to my version, the version they had crushed all this time. The heir determination hearing. The day of the hearing, I sat on a long bench inside the courthouse, my palms cold. The room wasn't as grand as the ones I'd seen on television. The paint was dull. An old ceiling fan spun slowly overhead. Oliver sat beside me, a thick folder on his lap. "Relax, Margaret," he whispered. "This is just a formality. All documents are complete." I nodded, though my heart raced. My name was called. We entered. The process was far shorter than I expected. The judge asked a few questions. When did George Whitman pass away? Who were his heirs? Was there any dispute? Then the judge asked, "Is the daughter Rebecca Whitman present?" I swallowed. "No, Your Honor, she doesn't know about this process." The judge nodded. Based on the documents, the heirs of the late George Whitman are his wife, Margaret Collins, and his biological daughter, Rebecca Whitman. However, regarding this bank account, which records indicate was intended for the wife, the distribution may be adjusted through family deliberation. The formal ruling will be issued next week. Outside the room, my knees felt weak. "What does that mean?" I asked Oliver. "It means legally you and Rebecca are both heirs, but we have this letter. In practice, assets clearly intended for one person, especially a personal bank account, can be treated as a special portion, especially if there's proof the other party already received assets, like the house." I exhaled slowly. The following week, I returned to Atlantic National Bank. The same officer smiled. "Congratulations, ma'am. The heir determination has been finalized." She handed me documents to sign. This time, I read carefully. Oliver sat beside me, ready to explain anything I didn't understand. No Henry, no Rebecca, just me, Oliver, and the bank officer. When I signed the final page, the officer said, "Effective today, the account..."
Rebecca, as a teenager, crying because her exam retake score was bad, held in our arms. Rebecca, as an adult, bringing Henry into the house and saying, "Dad, Mom, Rebecca is happy." "When did you change this much, my child?" I whispered to myself. When did my daughter become someone who could throw a plastic bag at her own mother's face? Oliver Grant was silent for a moment before answering. "People can change slowly, Mrs. Collins. Sometimes we don't realize it because we love them. But what matters now isn't regretting that change anymore. What matters is, what do you want to do next?" I used to just want them to come back, apologize, and invite me to live in the new house, I admitted honestly. I imagined them showing up with a cake, saying they were wrong. But every day the stories I hear get worse. They paint themselves as victims, as if I'm a burden. I opened my eyes and looked at Oliver. If I stay silent, that means I agree with how they treat me. It means I agree with how they dishonor George. Oliver nodded. That's exactly what I think, Mrs. Collins. I looked again at George Whitman's handwritten letter and the bank passbook in my hands. These two objects were no longer just paper and numbers. They were proof that I wasn't crazy, that my feelings were valid. I was treated unfairly. I'm afraid it's a sin to fight my own child, I said softly. But do I have to stay silent until I die in a cramped rental like this? Oliver looked at me, his eyes gentle but firm. Standing against injustice is not a sin, Mrs. Collins, as long as what you're doing isn't to destroy, but to defend your rights and protect yourself. I fell silent for a long time. Images of Rebecca and Henry came and went in my head, them laughing in their new house, telling their version of the story to everyone. Then another image, Rebecca and Henry sitting across from me, forced to listen to evidence they had dismissed for years. If I stay quiet, they'll keep going, I said slowly. They'll think what they did is acceptable, and they'll treat others the same they treated me. That's right, Oliver replied. They'll never feel the need to change. I let out a long breath, as if lifting a heavy stone from my chest. All right, I finally said. Then we move forward. We secure everything, slowly, carefully, not for blind revenge, but to teach them that parents are not disposable. I gripped the passbook tightly, for the first time, not just as my husband's legacy, but as a weapon. In my heart, I spoke to George. I hear you, Tom. I'll protect myself. Just this once, I'll stop being the victim. A few months after the account was officially transferred into my name, my life on the surface looked the same. Morning grocery runs, cooking simple meals, afternoons sitting on the porch of the small rental. The difference was inside my head, constant calculations, rent, electricity, rice, and the shadow of $5 million always hovering in the background. Oliver placed most of the funds into secure instruments. I only held a small debit card for daily expenses. One afternoon, Oliver arrived looking more tense than usual. He sat down without small talk and placed a folder on the table. There's new information, Mrs. Collins. My heart immediately started pounding. What kind? A friend of mine works at a financing office, Oliver said after a breath. Henry is behind on his car and mortgage payments. He's been warned several times. He's under pressure. I looked down. A small part of me felt pity, but a much larger part felt cold. So the money from selling the old house is gone, Oliver replied. Mostly. A large portion went into an investment that turned out to be problematic. His friend's business collapsed. The money evaporated. I remembered Henry's confident laughter when he talked about big opportunities and taking risks. Back then, I stayed silent. I didn't understand any of it. People like that can become reckless when cornered, Oliver continued, and we're starting to see signs of that. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. Oliver opened the folder and pulled out a document. There's a note from Atlantic National Bank, the bank where George's account was originally held. A few weeks ago, a man came in claiming to be George's son-in-law. His name was Henry. He asked about the account history, whether there were other savings. My fingers clenched the edge of my skirt. They're getting suspicious. That's what it looks like, Oliver said. Fortunately, the A&B staff followed protocol. They gave him no information, just said everything had been handled by the legal heir. Cold sweat broke out on my neck. If they find out, they'll come here. "That's why I'm here today," Oliver said. "We're entering a rougher phase now. They're desperate. If they believe you're holding something, they may pressure you, force you, or twist the narrative even further." Before I could respond, my old phone rang on the table, a number I knew all too well. Rebecca Whitman appeared on the screen. Oliver and I exchanged looks. "Answer it, Mrs. Collins," he said quietly. "I'm here." With trembling fingers, I pressed the green button. "Hello?" Rebecca's voice came through sharp and high. "Where are you, Mom?" I replied shortly. "At home." "Home?" she scoffed. "You mean that pathetic rental. You enjoy embarrassing us everywhere you go, don't you?" I frowned. "Embarrassing you how?" "Don't play dumb, Mom," Rebecca snapped. "We heard from people. Dad's inheritance was handled without telling me. I'm his daughter, not some stranger." I glanced at Oliver. He gave a small nod, signaling me to stay calm. "I followed my lawyer's advice," I said softly. "Rebecca, this is procedure, and you already received the house." "What house?" Rebecca exploded. "We sold that for the down payment on our new place. That wasn't a share, Mom. That was an obligation. You expected us to live in that old dump forever?" "Your father said that house was not to be sold while I was alive." My voice rose despite myself. "But you sold it anyway. And now you're angry because I handled Dad's savings," she shot back. "That account was in his name, intended for Mom." Rebecca went silent for a few seconds, then laughed shortly. "Intended? That unclear letter you found in a trash bag, and you believed it." My heart felt like it had been doused with ice water. "How do you know about that?" "Henry saw it when you were making a scene with that plastic bag," she replied coldly. "He remembered a brown folder. We thought it was just old papers. Turned out that's where the inheritance was hidden." "It wasn't hidden," I said firmly. "Your father stored it that way. I only found out after I was thrown out." "Thrown out?" Rebecca scoffed. "Mom, stop playing the victim. We just wanted you to understand the situation. Things are hard now. Mortgage payments, kids' school, Henry's job is unstable. If you loved us, you'd help, not secretly take control of everything." "This isn't about love," I replied. "It's about rights. Your father intended that money for me. You already received the house." "You really think you can win against your own daughter?" she said sharply. "Don't forget, I'm legally an heir too. If you're stubborn, we'll take the official route. We'll file a lawsuit if we have to, so people know what kind of mother you really are." My hand trembled around the phone. "Official route?" I whispered. "You'd sue your own mother?" "If you force us," she replied flatly. "I need copies of your ID, your latest documents, everything related to Dad. Tell your lawyer to stop hiding." "If I refuse?" I asked quietly. "Don't blame me when you get summoned to court," she snapped. "And don't call me unfilial. I'm just defending myself." I closed my eyes, holding back the tightness in my chest. "Rebecca, do you even know where I live now? Have you ever asked what I eat, whether I sleep well?" She scoffed. "You chose to leave. We offered you a place. You refused." "I didn't leave," my voice broke. "You threw me out." Silence. Then she said coolly, "You're exaggerating." "Fine, Mom. If you want to be hard, we'll see what happens. Don't cry when your name gets dragged through the mud. We'll explain our version." Click. The call ended. I stood frozen, phone still pressed to my ear. Oliver gently touched the back of my hand. "It's okay, Mrs. Collins." I placed the phone on the table. My breathing was uneven. "They're ready to sue me," I whispered. "The child I raised, willing to drag me to court over money." Oliver nodded seriously. "I heard everything. Stay calm. This actually benefits us." Benefits? I echoed. Yes, he said firmly. With their threats, we now have clear. If Mom insists, then we'll take the official route. Those words, the official route, had now turned into the letter trembling in my hands. I'm a mother, I whispered softly. There's still a part of me that hopes they'll come, apologize, and say this was all a misunderstanding. But if I give in now, I asked quietly, will they stop? Oliver Grant shook his head slowly. No, Mrs. Collins. People who are willing to sue their own mother for money, if you give in, they learn one thing, that this method works. Next time there's a problem, they'll use the same tactic again. I fell silent. Another image formed in my mind. Rebecca sitting in the courtroom, Henry beside her, my grandchildren possibly seated in the back row, all of them forced to listen to recordings, forced to see their grandfather's handwritten letters. If I moved forward, our relationship would be destroyed. My daughter might never come back. Oliver looked me deeply. Mrs. Collins, honestly, where is that relationship now? The question froze me. I thought about the past few months, nights alone in a cramped rental, holidays without a single message, a daughter who chose court threats over simply asking if I had eaten. Maybe it was already broken long ago, I answered quietly. I just didn't want to see it. Oliver nodded. What you're protecting now isn't a relationship that no longer exists. You're protecting yourself. You're protecting your late husband's name, and you're protecting a lesson for your grandchildren so that one day they'll know their grandparents were not the people described in those stories. I exhaled heavily. His words sank in slowly but deeply. A few days before the first hearing, Mrs. Anderson took me to the Senior Community Health Center in the district. So you can check your blood pressure, she said. Don't get sick right before court. There, I met a young woman in her early 30s wearing a social worker's vest. Her name was Rosa. Is this Mrs. Margaret Collins? She asked kindly after Mrs. Anderson mentioned my name. I'm Rosa, a social worker here. I've heard a bit about your story. I smiled stiffly. Which version? I asked. My life lately is nothing but stories, written by everyone else. Rosa chuckled softly, then turned serious. I just want to say you're not alone. Many elderly parents are treated unfairly by their children, but don't dare to speak up. The fact that you're taking this to court, that's already a big step. I'm not brave, I replied quietly. I'm forced. If I don't move forward, I'll disappear. Sometimes courage is born from desperation, Rosa said gently. If you ever need someone to talk to or non-legal support, I'm here. Not everyone will see you the way they describe you. Her words were simple but grounding. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a troublesome mother, but as a human being. The night before the hearing, I sat alone on the floor. George Whitman's bank passbook and letter rested on my lap. I put on my reading glasses. Though I had memorized the letter by heart, I read it again. If one day you are driven out, belittled, or made to feel worthless, you will still have something to live on with dignity. That day has come, Tom. I've been expelled, humiliated, even dragged to court, but I still have capital, not just money, but your words. The next morning, Oliver picked me up in a taxi. On the way to the courthouse, I watched the city pass by through the window. People heading to work, children biking to school, women chatting at corner shops. They had no idea that inside a cold courtroom, a mother and her child would face each other, not as family, but as plaintiff and defendant. In front of the courthouse steps, my feet hesitated. "If I back out now, is it still possible?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Oliver answered honestly. "You could call them, offer peace, offer to divide the money. They might withdraw the lawsuit. But the price wouldn't just be money," he continued. "You'd have to accept their treatment forever, because they'd know pressure works on you." I stared at the tall courthouse doors. The memory of Rebecca throwing a black trash bag at my face flashed vividly. The stale smell, the sting on my cheek, the neighbors' helpless, pitying stares. I lifted my chin slightly. "I've given in too many times," I said. "I've stayed silent too long. Today, I want them to hear my voice." Oliver smiled faintly. That's the answer I was hoping for. We walked inside. In the corridor, I saw silhouettes I knew all too well. Rebecca in a sharp blazer, Henry beside her, his hair slicked back. Behind them, Lucas stood stiffly. Natalie looked down, fiddling with her phone. Little Claire sat on a bench, swinging her legs in the air. Rebecca looked at me. Her eyes were no longer those of a child who once ran toward me calling Mom. They were the eyes of an opponent. This is no longer about money, I told myself. This is the day everything they hid begins to surface. The courtroom was cold and rigid, wooden benches stiff, the air filled with whispers. I sat behind the defendant's table beside Oliver. Across from us sat Rebecca and Henry as plaintiffs. Seeing that written on paper still felt unreal, a child suing her mother. The judge entered. Everyone stood. After formalities, the judge spoke. "Plaintiff, please present your case." Rebecca's lawyer stood, neatly dressed, voice calm but sharp. "Your Honor, my clients, Mrs. Rebecca Whitman and her husband, Henry Whitman, are not here to attack a parent. They're seeking justice in the distribution of the inheritance left by the late George Whitman." He explained at length that after George's death, I allegedly concealed a large savings account, that the old house was sold for family interests, and that I failed to appreciate my children's sacrifices, taking full control of the inheritance without family discussion. My jaw tightened. Every sentence felt like a carefully crafted narrative designed to make them look virtuous. When Rebecca testified, she stood trembling slightly, but spoke smoothly. "I'm just exhausted, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking. "My whole life I tried to be a good daughter. I took my mother into my home. I paid for food, electricity, everything. But she was never satisfied. When we wanted to sell the house for our children's future, she caused trouble. Now I've learned there was a large savings account my father kept, and my mother handled it secretly without telling me." "How do you feel about your mother's actions?" the judge asked. Rebecca lowered her head, tears pooling. "I feel betrayed, Your Honor. I'm her biological child, yet I was treated like a stranger." I noticed a few people in the back shaking their heads sympathetically. I caught Lucas watching his mother with uncertainty. Natalie's face was tense. Then it was our turn. Oliver stood, his voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, We do not deny that Mrs. Rebecca Whitman is a biological child and legal heir. However, there are critical facts that must be considered in full. First, the disputed savings account was a personal account under the late George Whitman's name, which he never disclosed to the plaintiffs during his lifetime. Within our documents is a handwritten letter explaining his intention. Oliver handed the letter to the judge. The judge read, "This is Mr. Whitman's handwriting. Yes, Your Honor, we have verified it against official documents and his signature. If necessary, we are prepared to present witnesses who worked with him." "Continue," the judge said. "The plaintiffs claim the house sale was a sacrifice for the family's future. However, we discovered another letter in the same folder." Oliver submitted the...
I finished speaking with my head slightly bowed. The judge nodded. His expression was difficult to read, but his eyes were not cold. The hearing continued with rebuttals from Rebecca's attorney, but his voice no longer carried the same confidence as before. Several times he tried to reframe the recording as a momentary emotional outburst. Henry interrupted, insisting they had given so much before finally losing patience. Lucas was then called forward as a witness. He looked nervous, his eyes shifting between his parents and me. "Who are you living with now?" the judge asked. "I'm renting a room now, Your Honor," Lucas answered quietly. "Why aren't you living with your parents? Their house is large enough, isn't it?" Lucas swallowed hard. "I don't feel comfortable there, Your Honor. Ever since my grandmother was thrown out, the atmosphere in the house, I couldn't stand seeing that. I tried to protest, but I was always scolded, so I left." Rebecca stared at her son in shock and anger, but Lucas didn't dare meet her eyes. On the back bench, Natalie lowered her head even further, her phone completely still in her hands. After all witnesses were heard, the judge closed the file. "This hearing will continue next week for the reading of the verdict," he said. When the gavel struck, the tension eased slightly, but it did not disappear. Outside the courtroom, my body felt light and heavy at the same time. Many eyes were on me, but for the first time, I didn't rush to lower my gaze in shame. On the courthouse steps, we crossed paths again with Rebecca and Henry. Rebecca's face was red, whether from anger or humiliation, perhaps both. Henry stared at me sharply. "Satisfied now?" he muttered, "dragging your own family through public disgrace." I looked straight back at him. "You brought this here, Henry. You were the one who invited me to meet in front of a judge. I simply showed up to your invitation." Rebecca bit her lip and said nothing. Lucas glanced at me briefly, his eyes wet. Natalie didn't dare look up. Claire clutched her doll tightly, confused. In my heart, I said, to them and to myself, this isn't over. But whatever the verdict would be, one thing had already happened. The voice you tried to silence finally came out in a place you could no longer control. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom felt colder than before. I sat on the same bench, my hands gripping the edge of my shawl. Beside me, Oliver Grant opened his folder, double-checking the documents even though everything was already prepared. Across from us, Rebecca and Henry sat stiffly. Rebecca's face was pale. Henry tried to look calm, but his fingers tapped the table non-stop. The judge entered. We stood, then sat again. A few seconds of silence passed before he began reading. After hearing testimony from all parties and witnesses, and after reviewing all submitted evidence, the court finds, my heart followed every word, that the account in the name of the late George Whitman was transferred to the rightful heir in accordance with legal procedure, and that there exists a handwritten letter from the deceased clearly stating his intention that the account be used to secure the life of his wife, Margaret Collins. I held my breath. That the family home was sold without ensuring housing protection for the deceased's wife, contrary to the written intentions of George Whitman. The court further finds that neglect and improper treatment of an elderly parent occurred, as evidenced by the submitted recording. The judge exhaled softly before continuing. Therefore, the court rules: first, the plaintiff's claim regarding unilateral control of inheritance funds is denied. The funds in the account under Margaret Collins' name are declared her full legal right in accordance with the deceased's intent. Rebecca covered her mouth, stifling a cry. Henry stiffened. Second, the court declares that the plaintiffs benefited from the sale of the family home without providing proper protection to the defendant. The defendant is therefore entitled to financial compensation equal to her rightful share, plus additional compensation for emotional distress and neglect. The judge stated the amount. I didn't focus on the exact figure, only that it was large enough to shake Rebecca and Henry's lives. Third, the court issues a formal reprimand to the plaintiffs for their treatment of a parent, stating that expelling an elderly parent without proper shelter violates both legal norms and moral standards. The gavel struck. This court is adjourned. The room erupted into murmurs. Some whispered, others exhaled deeply. Oliver gently patted the back of my hand. "Thank God," he said softly. "There is still a little justice left in this world." I nodded, my eyes burning, not because of the money, but because of one sentence: contrary to law and morality. There was official recognition that what they did to me was wrong. That alone eased my chest. Outside the courtroom, we crossed paths again. This time, Henry spoke first. "Happy now?" His voice was hoarse. "We're ruined. The house could be seized. The business is unstable. The kids are the talk of the town. You enjoy watching us fall?" I looked at him for a long moment. "You dug the hole yourself, Henry. I just stopped standing inside it." Rebecca looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "Don't you feel sorry for me, Mom?" "You should have felt sorry for yourself long ago," I replied quietly, "and for your children, for your husband, for your father, for your mother." She fell silent, her shoulders shaking. For the first time, I saw tears that weren't for appearances, tears of someone who had truly lost control. Lucas approached after his parents stepped away. "Grandma?" he called softly. "Yes, dear." "I'm sorry I didn't protect you from the start. I was scared, but I knew they were wrong. That's why I left the house." I looked at his face and saw a trace of George there. "You're still young, Lucas. You still have time to choose your own path. I ask you only one thing. Never treat your parents the way you saw that day. Anyone's parents." Lucas nodded, eyes wet. "I promise, Grandma." Natalie stood a little farther away, hugging her bag. She glanced at me briefly, then looked down again. I didn't force her. There would be time. Months passed. Rebecca and Henry's suburban home was eventually auctioned. The mortgage piled up, along with their obligation to pay compensation to me. Henry lost his standing at work. Several colleagues sued him for a failed investment scheme. Rebecca was forced to move into a smaller rental, far from the lifestyle she once flaunted on social media. As for me, I live in a small house I bought in my own name, not luxurious, but clean and orderly. The walls are painted a soft cream. In the living room hangs a large framed photo of George Whitman. Beneath it sits a small table with a plastic flower vase. Every week, I go to the senior community center where Rosa works. Sometimes I join light exercise classes. Sometimes I just sit and talk. I meet many elderly people with stories like mine. Children who lost their way, harsh in-laws, confused grandchildren. I thought I was the only one discarded in this world, I once said. Rosa smiled sadly. That's exactly why your story matters. It can be a reminder for others. I kept part of the $5 million carefully saved. Part I used to live simply. The rest, with Oliver's help, I placed into education trust funds under Lucas and Natalie's names. Not extravagant amounts, but meaningful. Why would you still do that? Oliver asked. I don't want them repeating the same sin, I replied. If they can stand on their own feet without stepping on their parents, I'll consider it my final gift to their grandfather. Set it so they can only access it once they're truly adults, I added. And the condition is simple. They must never neglect their parents in any form. Oliver chuckled softly. That's the most reasonable condition I've ever heard. One rainy afternoon, as drizzle fell softly, my porch was knocked gently. When I opened, Rebecca stood there alone. No car, no heavy makeup. Her umbrella was tilted, half her clothes wet. How did you get his address? I asked flatly. Lucas, she answered quietly. May I come in, Mom? I hesitated. Two voices argued inside me. One wanted to slam the door. The other wanted to pull out a chair. In the end, I stepped aside. Come in. She sat on the simple guest chair, her eyes scanning the room, the photo of her father, the small table, the cheap tablecloth. Your house is nice, she said softly, more like a home than mine ever was. I didn't respond. After a moment of silence, she spoke quickly. I'm not here to ask for money. I know I have no rights left. I just don't know where to start. Start with honesty, I said. No excuses,